Hello, YouTube divers. This is WaterDive 122, and today I want to welcome you all back to part 2 of episode 12 of Magic Metal Mondays, where I take Black Sabbath's albums and I rank them from worst to best, in my opinion. So, yesterday we left off on number 11. Today we are going to go over the top 10, from number 10 all the way down to number 1. So, without further ado, let's get started. Coming in at number 10, their most recent album, 2013's 13. And I mainly put this album this high on the list is because Ozzy Osbourne makes his return to the band, which in of its own self is pretty good in my eyes. Ozzy Osbourne is basically what makes Black Sabbath for the most part. But this album is my third least favorite from the Ozzy Osbourne era. But that's still, this is an underrated album by Sabbath for one thing. The songs are average, like either at average or above average. Heck, some of them even crack good. I mean, and especially for a long wait that this album had waited for, because this was the first album that they made since Forbidden in 1995. I talked about that on the previous video. But and if this is really their last album, because Tony Iommi is saying that Black Sabbath is gonna be done in a couple of weeks or something like that, then I'd say they went out on a high note. So, number 10 is the album 13 from 2013. Moving on to number 9. Now, this one is quite a controversial pick. I'm putting the self-titled debut album from 1970 here at number 9. Mainly because I do think that there are better albums than this. But this is still a freaking classic album. I mean, for one thing, the title track is freaking amazing. NIB is another gem. And also The Wizard. 3 classic Black Sabbath songs right then and there. But in my opinion, this is a debut album, and I tend to give a lot of flack when it comes to debut albums by great bands. This one here is somewhat an exception because of the 3 classic songs I mentioned that are on this album. A lot of Black Sabbath fans say that this is their masterpiece. I can definitely see why. But for me, I just feel like there are better albums than this. So let's find out what those better albums are. Number 8, the 1981 album, Mob Rules. This is the second album of the Dio era, and this was the final album to feature Ronnie James Dio on vocals until 1992's Dehumanizer. And what a freaking album this is. Yeah, it is tough to follow up a classic album that was Heaven and Hell, but I say, and this is definitely a step down compared to Heaven and Hell, but this is still a freaking amazing album by Black Sabbath. And the title track alone is one of the greatest songs of the Dio era, in my opinion. It's like top 10 with that song and pretty much all the songs on Heaven and Hell. But anyways, this album is freaking amazing. Dio is probably at his most aggressive on vocals. And that's what I like about Ronnie James Dio. His voice is just so iconic in the metal world, and he has a tone like no other metal vocalist I've ever heard. I could be wrong, but he has a very distinctive tone, and it's recognizable. He shows that on his solo albums that he did after he left Sabbath for a while. Rest in peace, Ronnie James Dio. But yeah, this album is freaking amazing, and I love it. Coming in at number 7, the 1975 album Sabotage. Yeah, I'm going to get some flack for this one. This is another one of those Black Sabbath albums where Black Sabbath fans would put this like at number 1 or in the top 5. But there are still some freaking classic songs on here. Like, 2 of my favorite Black Sabbath songs are, of course, Symptom of the Universe, which is amazing. And, of course, Hole in the Sky, freaking amazing. I love those 2 songs to death. And I think there was a song on here called The Kiss of Death or something like that. I could be wrong, but something on the lines of that. Freaking amazing song, too. So, Sabotage, great album, but like with the self-titled album, I do think that there are better albums than this, but this is still a freaking staple in the Black Sabbath discography. So yeah, number 7 goes to Sabotage from 1975. Number 6 is Volume 4 from 1972. Yet another controversial pick here. In my opinion, this was really the album that broke out Black Sabbath. This is without a doubt a very classic album. In fact, one of my favorite Black Sabbath songs is on this album, which is freaking Snowblind. I think that's off this album. Yeah, I think so. Snowblind, freaking amazing song. I love it so gosh darn much. And it's frequently played over and 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 over again in the Black Sabbath live material. So, Snowblind, in and of its own self, freaking killer. The rest of the album is also great. Tony Iommi sounds great, as does Geezer Butler and Bill Ward. I think he plays on this album. Yeah, he does. And, of course, Ozzy Osbourne himself. Everything's great on this album. I just think that these next 5 are a little bit better. So, without further ado, let's find out what number 5 is. Number 5. Holy jeez. Number 5, the 1971 album, Master of Reality. Now, this is another one of those Black Sabbath albums that could easily be, like, in anyone's top 3, but for me, it falls just short. But there are some really great tracks on here, like, for example, Children of the Grave, amazing. And, of course, Sweet Leaf, another pair of my favorite Black Sabbath songs of all time. Master of Reality is a really great album from Black Sabbath. It's probably one of their most heaviest albums that they ever did, or at least in the Ozzy Osbourne era. This was really one of the first albums where down tuning started to become a factor, because now you were hearing Black Sabbath play in tunings like D flat tuning, which was really, really shocking of its time. For a band to do this in 1971, where bands like Pink Floyd and Yes and bands like that, they were really starting to blow up. Oh yeah, and especially Led Zeppelin. For a band like Black Sabbath to do something as great as this is freaking amazing, and that just goes to show you where the roots of heavy metal are. In my opinion, this is the real first metal album, along with Paranoid, but we'll get to that later. So, number 5 goes to Master of Reality from 1971. Number 4, the 1980 album, Heaven and Hell. Easily my favorite album of the Ronnie James Dio era. This album is freaking amazing. This was basically the album that turned me on to Dio. Really, because I first heard the song Neon Nights. First off, what an opener that is. It's a freaking amazing opener. And follow that up with Children of the Sea, which is my personal favorite song on the album. I love the opening acoustic intro of Children of the Sea, and then the more heavier, aggressive stuff that we all know Dio from. And of course, the title track as well. Freaking amazing. This album is just amazing, and what a way to start off an era with a brand new singer at the helm, because this was the first album to not feature Ozzy Osbourne or the original drummer Bill Ward. I don't remember who filled in for him on drums, but yeah. Geezer Butler's lyrics are of course as dark as ever. Tony Iommi, well, listen to the song Neon Nights and you'll see what I'm talking about. Number 3, the 1970 album Paranoid. And yes, I think Paranoid is a way better album than their debut, mainly because this was the album that turned me on to Black Sabbath, with the title track of this album, of course. The title track of this album was the first Black Sabbath song I ever heard, and what can I say? It's freaking awesome. And of course, you got the classic song, but in my opinion, kind of overplayed, Iron Man. And of course, you have War Pigs, which is phenomenal. Really the big three, really my top three of those, of this album. And what can I say? It's classic, but I think there are 2 albums that are better than this album. So let's find out what they are. Number 2, the 1989 album Headless Cross. Oh my goodness, this is a freaking masterpiece. I mean, this is definitely my favorite album of the Tony Martin era by a freaking long shot. Headless Cross is one of those albums where you just don't want it to end. I remember listening to this album for the very first time, and I was like, oh my gosh. I mean, I was simply blown away. It sounded like a brand new band. It didn't sound like the Black Sabbath I was used to, because at this point I was already a big fan of the Ozzy Osbourne era and a little bit of a fan of the Dio era. Didn't really get into Born Again or Seventh Star very much, but when I heard this gem of an album, I was simply blown away. Tony Martin sounds amazing. In my opinion, the title track of this album, freaking kills it. Tony Martin, what more can I say? Tony Martin is a freaking underrated singer, and I wish he had gotten more love with Black Sabbath. But I believe this was the first album to feature Cozy Powell on the drums, and of course, he kills it too. I really love the title track of this album, and also At the Gates of Hell is a nice little intro, kind of instrumental, like suspense type of song. And also the tracks near the end, I don't really remember what the names of those tracks are right off the top of my head. But basically, this album is freaking flawless, and it breaks my heart to put this album at number 2. But in my opinion, there is one other album by Black Sabbath that just slightly overtakes this album. So let's find out what it is. Number 1. This is one of my top 20 all-time favorite metal albums. Sadly not in my top 10, but my goodness gracious, it's this close. We are talking about Sabbath Bloody Sabbath from 1973. Oh my goodness gracious. Speaking of great vocal performances, Ozzy Osbourne is at his best on this album. I mean, from the title track to Sabracadabra to the closing track, I can never remember the name of that song. But it's mainly the title track and, of course, Sabracadabra, which are 2 of my top 100 all-time favorite metal songs. Freaking amazing. So many beautiful moments on this album. I can't help but love this album. Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, number 1. Freaking classic. No freaking denying it. So, and that wraps up my Black Sabbath album rankings. Thank you so much for watching, my fellow YouTube divers. This is Water Eye 122, ready to dive into more fun on YouTube. Thanks for watching.